Okay, picture this. It's August of 410 AD, and something is happening that's going to send shockwaves across the entire ancient world. The city of Rome, the eternal city, the unconquered heart of an empire, is being pillaged. But the story we all think we know, one of just fire and chaos and a fiery end to an era, well, that might not be the whole story. So let's get into it and separate the myth from the reality of the 410 sack of Rome.
And that right there, that's the reaction from St. Jerome. And he's writing this from thousands of miles away in Bethlehem. His words just perfectly captured the sheer disbelief, the trauma of that moment. You have to understand, for people living at the time, the fall of Rome wasn't just some military defeat. It felt like the world itself was cracking apart. So the big question is, how on earth did it come to this?
800 years. Just let that number sink in. That's how long Rome had stood unbreached by a foreign enemy, not since the Gauls way back in 390 BC. We're talking 8 straight centuries of being seen as invincible, as the absolute center of the known world. And that unbroken streak, it made what happened in 410 completely unthinkable. It was a psychological gut punch of unimaginable proportions.
Now, of course, a catastrophe like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was, let's be honest, a shadow of its former self. It had been hollowed out by political chaos, economic decay, and just constant grinding military pressure on its borders.
So you've got these two men at the very center of the storm, on a total collision course. On one side, you have Alaric, king of the Visigoths. And look, he wasn't some wild barbarian just bent on destruction. His goals were surprisingly, well, Roman. He wanted a secure place for his people inside the empire. Land, regular supplies, and a legitimate Roman military command for himself. And on the other side, you have Emperor Honorius. He's weak, he's moved the capital to the swampy, isolated city of Ravenna, and he's pretty much just a puppet for his manipulative court.
To really get what's going on here, you have to understand this one critical term, foederati. See, the Goths weren't just outsiders. They were deeply, deeply entangled with the Roman military. For decades, they've been serving as allied troops for Rome, fighting its battles in exchange for pay and provisions. So this whole conflict, it wasn't a simple invasion. It was the messy, violent breakdown of a very complex and very tense working relationship.
So Alaric didn't just pop up at the gates of Rome one day. His final march on the city was really the climax of years of broken promises, failed deals, and flat-out betrayals that pushed him from being a frustrated Roman ally to an enemy at the gates. Let's take a look at how this all went down. This timeline really shows you the slow burn of this disaster. In 394, Alaric's men tie by the thousands fighting for the emperor, and they get almost nothing for it. Then he tries to invade Italy in 402, but he's stopped by this brilliant general, Stilicho, who's one of the few guys who actually understands the need to negotiate. But then, 408, this is where it all implodes. Honorius, totally convinced by his court that Stilicho is a traitor, has him executed. And just like that, the one man who could have brokered a peace deal was off the board.
And Stilicho's execution didn't just get rid of a diplomat. It unleashed this horrific wave of anti-barbarian hysteria. This was the true breaking point. Roman troops went on a rampage, massacring the wives and children of the foederati soldiers who were serving in their own army. In response, 30,000 of these highly trained soldiers abandoned Rome and flocked straight to Alaric's banner. And they weren't just followers. They were vengeful, motivated men with a serious score to settle. Alaric's army basically swelled overnight.
Which brings us to the sack itself. We've all seen the paintings, right? The fire, the slaughter, the total destruction of a city. But modern archaeology is starting to tell us a very, very different story.
So let's just ask the question directly. What does the actual physical evidence tell us about what went down over those 3 days in August 410?
Okay, so here's the core of it. The myth, which comes from those totally shell-shocked written accounts, gives us a city in flames. But the reality, which is what we're uncovering with archaeology, points to something more like a systematic 3-day looting operation. The goal wasn't to burn Rome to the ground. It was to strip it of its immense portable wealth.
I mean, this is where it gets really interesting. Archaeologists digging in Rome have found no evidence, zero, of a citywide fire from this period. And those famous examples of destruction we hear about, a lot of them are pretty ambiguous. We can't even be sure they were caused by the Goths. The real damage was the loss of gold, silver, and centuries of accumulated treasure. It was a heist, not an apocalypse.
And here's another detail that just totally complicates that myth of the mindless barbarian. Alaric himself was a Christian. He gave specific orders to his men to spare the great basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul and to respect the right of sanctuary for anyone, anyone who took shelter inside. They even ceremoniously returned stolen church vessels. This was clearly not a mindless, chaotic rampage.
So, if the sack wasn't the physical end of Rome, what was its true impact? Well, the real damage wasn't to Rome's buildings. It was to something much, much more important.
This quote just nails the tragic irony of the whole situation. For Alaric, sacking Rome was a catastrophic failure. It completely destroyed any chance he had of getting what he really wanted, a legitimate, recognized place for his people inside the Roman system. He never wanted to destroy Rome. He wanted to be Roman, and by sacking the city, he slammed that door shut forever.
So, the deepest wound was psychological. For 800 years, the idea of Rome as the eternal, invincible city was like the geopolitical gravity holding the whole world together. The sack shattered that idea. The shockwave from that realization is what truly changed history. It proved that the empire was fragile and that its center could not hold.
The fallout from all this was immense, as you can see here. Politically, it totally exposed the emperor's weakness. Economically, it was a massive drain of capital. But it's that last one, the cultural impact, that was the most profound. It forced an entire generation to ask what it even meant to be Roman in a world where Rome itself could actually fall.
So, we're left with this big question. Was the sack of 410 the final act in the long tragedy of the Roman Empire? Or was it actually the prologue to a brand new story, the turbulent, messy, and dynamic birth of medieval Europe? Maybe it wasn't just a collapse. Maybe it was a transition, a violent and shocking event that cleared the way for the new kingdoms and new realities that would define the next 1,000 years.